If the terrorist danger was known and the imperative for organizational reform and intelligence was clear, then why weren't organizational weaknesses in the CIA and the FBI fixed before 9/11? Well, drawing on academic literature in both organization theory and political science, I argue that intelligence adaptation failure can be explained by three enduring realities. The first is the nature of bureaucratic organizations. No organization changes easily on its own. We know that even private firms, which are blessed with things like clear metrics of success and the ability to hire and fire employees relatively easily, even private firms fail at rates which may be surprising. 31% of all U.S. businesses tracked by the Census Bureau in 1990 failed within 4 years. And about one business in the U.S. fails every minute. And that's in many ways the best case scenario. Government agencies are even worse off than private firms because they don't have that private sector imperative to adapt or die. As Ronald Reagan once said, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth. What's more, public sector agencies have a much harder time responding to changing environmental demands because they are not designed to be nimble or innovative. They are designed to be reliable and fair, and to perform routine tasks in standard ways. Now, this is not all bad. Standard operating procedures ensure that Social Security checks get sent on time, and that pilots have the same rules of engagement in times of conflict. But the downside is that bureaucracies are hardwired to keep doing things the same old way, even when they shouldn't. One of my favorite examples of this is the Army, which kept a horse cavalry until World War II. The second enduring reality has to do with rational self-interest of political participants. Now, by rational self-interest, I don't mean selfish or evil motives. I mean simply that there are basic incentives that come with political offices. Consider presidents. Presidents have good reason to overhaul intelligence, to make intelligence work well for them. But presidents also rarely take on this fight because they have little time, limited political capital, few formal powers, and very long political agendas. No organizational reform ever won a landslide presidential election. As for Congress, history has shown that legislators are very good at holding hearings when things go awry, but not so good at doing much with their findings. And who can really blame them? Their electoral incentives lead them naturally to focus more on local concerns than foreign affairs, and more on policy than the nitty-gritty aspects of organizational design. Very few voters choose their senator or representative based on the candidate's positions on FBI personnel reform, for example. Finally, there are National Security Agency bureaucrats, and they have a large stake in the design of organizations outside of their own, because national security bureaucracies are so tightly connected. These bureaucrats see reform as a zero-sum game for agency power and autonomy. If one agency gets more power, another one invariably loses. The upshot of all these incentives is that presidents are unlikely to tackle thoroughgoing organizational change in intelligence, and when they do, they're unlikely to succeed. In fact, between the CIA's creation in 1947 and 9/11, not a single president, Democrat or Republican, pressed for intelligence overhaul, despite more than 40 major studies on the subject. The third enduring reality is our fragmented federal government. In our democratic system, change is always difficult. Now, the framers intended it to be that way, fearing that the power of government to move too quickly might lead to tyranny. Ironically, though, some of the cherished features of American democracy impede effective agency design and raise the obstacles to reform. Separation of powers, frequent elections, and majority rule all create a fragmented system that invites compromise. Now, we normally think of compromise as a good thing, but compromise is bad news from an agency design perspective. because it lets the opponents of a new agency sabotage that design from the very start. In fact, the reason the CIA director had such weak control over the other agencies in the intelligence community that the 9/11 Commission complained about after 9/11 was because the CIA director's position was crippled back in 1947 when that agency was created. Existing intelligence agencies at the time in the military services, in the State Department, and the Justice Department set out in the 1940s to weaken the CIA in order to maintain their own autonomy and power. These same democratic hallmarks also mean that problems are hard to fix. Once legislation is on the books, it's very, very hard to change down the road because, of course, success requires garnering multiple majorities within Congress all over again. Let me end by sharing some thoughts about the future. The late governor of Texas, Ann Richards, once said that fools rush in where fools have been before. And so to avoid that fate, I think the past offers 3 lessons for intelligence reformers. The first is that adaptation is a race against time. Hardwiring organizations to address current threats can hinder their ability to meet emerging ones. Or as one intelligence official told me shortly after 9/11, he worried that by the time we master the Al-Qaeda problem, will Al-Qaeda be the problem? The second lesson is that structural reforms are not enough. Culture is a silent but deadly killer of innovation. Since 9/11, we've created a number of new organizations and wiring diagrams. But these changes won't be effective if people continue to view their jobs in the same old ways. Today in the FBI, analysts still do not have the same stature as special agents who wear badges and carry guns. And so long as analysts are considered second-class citizens, the Bureau will be unable to produce first-rate intelligence. The third lesson is that windows of opportunity for major organizational reform are rare. If I'm right, then the causes of adaptation failure are systemic and they are difficult to overcome. The nature of organizations, rational self-interest, and the fragmented structure of our government aren't going away anytime soon. These 3 enduring realities mean that the opportunities for major reform don't come around often, and they don't last long. And so we have to make the most of them when they do.